You're listening to Myers-Briggs Question Corner with Edythe Richards. Hello listeners. Today's MBTI Question Corner podcast topic is one that's sure to generate a lot of discussion. And since I've started to learn more about the Myers-Briggs assessment, it's one I've often wondered about. Myers-Briggs types and bullying. Now, because this is potentially such a contentious topic, it's going to be part one of a three-part series. In this first part, we'll talk an overview of bullying and some of the signs of bullying, and we're going to gear our discussion towards bullying at work, rather than on the schoolyard or elsewhere. Next week, in part two, we'll delve into specific personality types who bully, and what you can do to minimise your risk, and how to respond effectively. In part three, which will air 2 weeks from now, we'll talk about personality types most likely to be bullied, and discuss some strategies to boost such areas as confidence and assertiveness to combat or make you immune to bullies. Now, because Edythe and I have been recording these weekly podcast episodes for over a year, I've got a pretty good idea of what she's going to say in terms of specific Myers-Briggs types. But I still believe this will be a useful discussion for our listeners, as bullying is a topic that's been all over the news in the past few years. Who are more likely to be bullies, and are there some who are more likely to be their victims? So, let me welcome Edythe Richards. Edythe, how's it going?
Hi, David. It's going great, thanks, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Since you brought this up a few months back, I've had this idea for a show in my mind, and I'm very pleased we're getting around to talking about this topic now. It's a hard topic to talk about, but a very necessary one, too.
Right, you are. So let's start by defining bullying. We often tend to think of bullies as the schoolyard ones, but more and more we hear about workplace bullies, and the different tactics they take at work to bully. I'm fortunate not to have to deal so much with that myself, since I work from home and have a pretty independent career. But cyberbullying is now becoming a hot topic, and we've heard a lot about the negative effect of that. So Edythe, with all this in mind, can you take a stab at defining bullying?
Well, let me preface that with a quick disclaimer by saying that I don't consider myself an expert on bullying, but there is an organization called the Workplace Bullying Institute, or WBI, which started out as a campaign back in 1997. And that wasn't really that long ago if we think about bullying as something that's been going on since the beginning of time. It's only in recent years that more attention has been paid to the effects of workplace stressors and overall well-being and the part that bullying plays in that. But the website workplacebullying.org has a lot of information on it, and it's very well organized. So a quick shout out to our listeners. My guess is that if you're tuning in, this is a potential hot topic for you. And so I really encourage you to check out that website. Again, Workplace Bullying Institute.
That sounds like an excellent resource. Thanks for that, Edythe.
So the definition of workplace bullying is repeated health-harming mistreatment of one or more persons, known as the targets, by one or more perpetrators. It's abusive conduct that's threatening, humiliating, or intimidating, or work interference, for example, sabotage, which prevents work from getting done, or verbal abuse.
So, according to the definition, bullying involves incidents severe enough to compromise someone's health or productivity at work.
Yes, it's incredibly stressful on multiple levels. And here's the interesting thing. According to the WBI, up to 1/3 of employees may be victims of bullying at work. I'm going to say that number is likely higher because a lot of incidents of bullying go unreported.
Wow, that's crazy. I can just hear it now. You're being too sensitive. Quit your whining. I'm not sure a lot of people even believe that these incidents are really bullying. Does this make any sense, Edythe?
Yeah, are we too quick to cry bully? Is bullying just a word that's thrown around too easily to account for any hurt feeling? We've really seen a change over the last 10 to 20 years in terms of how bullies are portrayed in the media and in pop culture. And I think with that, people may have started to confuse what actual bullying is as opposed to instances of anger. But the difference is that bullying is pervasive, intentional cruelty. Being rude is often unintentional, so we don't want to confuse them.
Yes, and there's always somebody just plain mean or just nasty. That can be a fine line to draw, and it begs the question, are mean people always bullies?
Well, there's a distinction to be made there too. The experts say that bullying entails three elements: an intent to harm, a power imbalance, and repeated acts or threats of aggressive behavior. But really, what we're talking about here is bullying and personality, and are certain personality types, and for the sake of this podcast, Myers-Briggs types, more or less likely to exhibit bullying behavior, and conversely, are certain Myers-Briggs types more or less likely to be bullied?
Yes, and from our previous episodes, Edythe, you've been very clear about the fact that the Myers-Briggs doesn't predict behaviour of any sort, though it's often mistakenly used as a predictor or a determinant for certain things. So of course it's natural to assume that certain personality types might be more likely to be bullies.
Right. As soon as people learn about personality theory and personality types, there's a tendency to stereotype. This type might be more intelligent than that one. This one is a better worker or will be a better fit for my team, or he or she will be a better romantic partner or leader because they're a certain type.
Oh yes. And if you're tuning in, you may be interested in some of these episodes that we did previously. Which Myers-Briggs types make the best leaders, and the smartest Myers-Briggs type. Look out for links in the notes below.
Thanks, David. That's very helpful. And I want to be really clear here. The Myers-Briggs isn't a measure of one's likelihood of becoming a bully or being bullied, just as it isn't a predictor of intelligence or leadership or good relationships. What this assessment does measure is one's preference on 4 broad-based dichotomies of personality. Of course, this doesn't stop people from making assumptions or attempting to predict behavior based on type theory.
So are you saying there's absolutely no correlation between Myers-Briggs types and bullying?
Well, let me say this. There is quite a lot of data on the Big 5 personality inventory and bullying. Studies have shown, and I'm going to cite 2 studies here, one from NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, and one from the American Psychological Association, that bullies themselves are low on agreeableness and conscientiousness, while the targets of bullies are high on neuroticism and low on extroversion. Now, there is some correlation between the Big 5 and the Myers-Briggs. Extroversion on the Big 5 correlates with extroversion, obviously, on the introversion-extroversion dichotomy. Most theologians state that agreeableness correlates with feeling on the thinking-feeling dichotomy, and conscientiousness is said to correlate with judging on the judging-perceiving dichotomy. But, and I'm no expert on the Big 5 here, conscientiousness has a lot more to it than fitting nice and neatly into the judging category. It's about being organized and structured and goal-oriented, which are traits often associated with judging types. But it's also about delaying impulses, acting in socially acceptable ways, working within the rules and such. Those aren't things that the Myers-Briggs measures.
I see. So these 2 assessments really don't stack up well against each other. It sounds like they're looking at different aspects of personality.
Well, there are some categories of the Big 5 which are pretty obvious correlations to Myers-Briggs, like the traits of extroversion and agreeableness, which we just talked about. And then there are others, like conscientiousness, which, in my opinion, could be a trait of any Myers-Briggs type. And then there's neuroticism, which doesn't correlate with anything the Myers-Briggs measures, essentially. Neuroticism refers to being anxious, irritable, and moody. So with this logic, the Myers-Briggs types most likely to be bullies or display bullying behavior are thinking types, and the targets of bullying are introverted types.
That's a pretty broad statement to make, though. I imagine there's a lot more to it than that.
Yes, it's a really complicated issue, and I don't for a second believe that all bullies or targets of bullying will fall into those categories. But for our purposes today, I'd like to stick to a kind of high-level view of bullying. We can get into more specifics of personality types, especially Myers-Briggs types, in our next episode.
Right. So speaking of personality and bullying, this kind of behaviour could boil down to such things as insecurity or anger. And those are things that any personality type can experience. Edythe, what do you say to that?
Well, we're on to something here because regardless of personality type, bullying is a way, albeit a negative and hurtful way, for someone to get their needs met. Let's think about the common basic needs people have. For example, assurance or stability or certainty. Let's think for a moment about this issue of control. What if you had absolutely no control over anything in your life? You'd be pretty angry, wouldn't you?
Well, yes. If I didn't know that I had a safe home, or if I wasn't sure my wife was cheating on me, or if I wasn't sure that my money was safe in the bank, or someone in my life suddenly started antagonizing me, or if I was worrying about the future. Oh, and here's one, health issues. Sometimes we have absolutely no control over that. And when you're in pain and can't control your pain, it's very possible you're going to get angry.
Right. Those are all good examples of a lack of control. It's awful when we think about it. And I'm not excusing the anger or the hurt feelings from both sides that come with that loss of control or stability. And to piggyback on that, some people will bully simply to get that need for assurance met. And it could be conscious or unconscious. It's like they're looking for a power fix, so they have to have control over something in their lives. And they can absolutely control how scared and how small and how intimidating they make other people feel. And in that moment, it feels good to be that powerful and to have that much control.
Right. It does go to show you how addictive power really is. It's intoxicating, and it's potentially dangerous.
You bet it is. I mean, we could go on and on about that. But here's my take, or part of my take, on the power dynamic. Human beings in general need to have connections with others. We're not meant to be solitary beings. At least unconsciously, we crave connections and group acceptance. But what if you grew up with parents who just left you alone, or you faced a lot of rejections at a young age? These are people who grow up fearing rejection and isolation. I'm sure you face this instance of watching some quote unquote powerful person or bully with a bunch of people around them, but they're not really friends of the bully. They just hang around the bully out of fear, so they won't become the next target. But really, they'd rather run in the opposite direction.
Oh yes, that's quite common in schools, isn't it?
And sadly, in the workplace too. And then as human beings, we all want to feel like we're important or significant and that we matter. But what if we believed on some level that we didn't?
Well, I'm guessing the people who believe that would probably lash out and make themselves known. It's a way for them to get noticed, perhaps. There are lots of fictional characters like that, and sadly, examples in our political world and business world too, in real life.
Right, so many examples. And these are behaviors that often get formed in childhood. By the time we reach adulthood and get into the workplace, these behaviors are pretty much set.
Edythe, that sounds almost hopeless. I mean, what can the average person do to stand up to bullies at work then? Or at least avoid them?
Well, the good news is that most workplaces have policies on bullying, what it is, what to do about it. I also recognize that a lot of bullying behavior goes unreported. I mean, frankly, it's not just embarrassing, but it's often shameful to the victim. And if the bully is the victim's boss or someone in power, it can be an upward battle to prove the allegations, and it can also be detrimental to the career of the victim. So I believe there are far more cases of bullying that go on at work than are actually reported.
It's awful to think that this is the case, but I see where you're coming from, Edythe. Now, I'm sure this is a topic we can talk on and on about for days. But to bring our discussion back to personality and workplace bullying, Edythe, do you believe that any specific personality type has more potential to be a bully or to be bullied?
I absolutely do, and it's for reasons beyond what the Myers-Briggs or any personality assessment measures. I'm not going to go so far as to say that personality has no bearing on one's tendencies towards bullying or being a victim of bullying, but I'm going to agree with the experts here and say that a much bigger factor in workplace bullying is the culture of the organization. The work environment itself is a more accurate predictor of bullying or why bullying is permitted to happen. And that comes from the top of the organization. If you have a CEO who demonstrates certain behaviors associated with bullying, essentially that's telling everyone underneath that these behaviors are okay. And certain industries breed certain behaviors, it's true.
And from what you're saying, Edythe, people like this who have risen to the top of their organizations have been rewarded for their behavior. So the assumption must be, keep on behaving like that, and you'll keep getting rewarded.
Absolutely. And by the time these folks have reached a certain level in their careers, their behaviors are pretty much fixed. And so are their personalities. They're set in their ways. They're too old to change. So I really do believe that it's not up to stopping the individual people. I'd say don't bother wasting time with that. They're not going to change. Instead, it really has to be up to the organization or the institution. They're the ones who have to put a stop to the bullying and make it unacceptable.
Well said, Edythe. Now, we're coming to the end of our time together here. Let me say that my key takeaways from this episode are that personality and certain behaviour traits are fixed by the time we enter the workplace. Personality is not necessarily an indicator of one's tendency to bully or to be bullied, and institutions need to take a stand against bullying. Ultimately, it's not going to be helpful for an individual, especially someone on the low end of the hierarchy, to put a lot of energy into wondering how this person can be so mean or to try to change someone. Rather, it's far more useful to put efforts together to remain confident, document the actions of the bully, and address the bully's behaviours through your Human Resources office. Edythe, many thanks for your insight on this topic.
Thank you, David. It's definitely a topic that continues to need discussing, and I look forward to next week.
Yes, next week we'll look more specifically at personality traits of bullies and how to deal with them. And in part 3, 2 weeks from now, we'll talk about personality traits of victims of bullies and taking action before it adversely affects your health and well-being, which is very important. Listeners, thank you for tuning in. A quick favour, if you've enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe to us on your favourite podcast platform and give us a share. We rely on word of mouth from listeners like you, and we want to continue to offer weekly content advertisement-free, but we can only do this with your help. Thanks again, and until next time. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you'd like to hear more, or you'd like to submit a question yourself, then you can find us at www.atopcareer.com. Until next time. MBTI and Myers-Briggs are registered trademarks of the MBTI Trust.